This is part 2 of my lecture series on democratic influences. This one deals with the philosophers. Part 2, the philosophers. So our first major philosopher is a guy by the name of John Locke. He's British, and he writes several different books on the government and people in the government and how people and the government should treat one another. The one that you need to know is this one right here. It's called the Two Treatises of Government of 1690. And what he says is the following. He says that individuals must become a rational creature. Virtue can be learned and practiced, and human beings possess free will. So by possessing this free will, they have freedom to come and have a social contract with their governments. So legislators owe their power to a contract with the people. And what he said is that neither king nor wealth or divinely ordained, i.e. the church, can take away your freedoms, your rights that you get from just being. So he was very much a major influence in the Enlightenment, and he was a major influence in our founding fathers and the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. So our next philosopher is a man by the name of Voltaire. Voltaire is not his real name. His real name is right up here. And for your PowerPoint presentation, what you need to know is this book right here. It's called Candide of 1759. Our next major philosopher that you need to know is a man by the name of Baron de Montesquieu. And the work that you need to get is this one right here, On the Spirit of the Laws of 1758. Montesquieu's philosophy was that there's basically three types of government. There's a monarchy, a republic, and there's despotism. And he says in order for freedom and liberty to be ensured in a government, you need to have a separation of political powers. And this should sound somewhat familiar because that's the kind of government that we have today. In the United States, we have a separation of powers. We have an executive, a judicial, and a legislative. And he said by having these separation of powers, we can guarantee that people will have more freedoms and liberties because these powers are always going to check and balance one another. So that's his major philosophy on government. The next major guy that you need to know is a guy by the name of JeanJacques Rousseau. And again, the social contract right here of 1792 is the work or body of work that you need to know for your PowerPoint presentation. JeanJacques' philosophy was one where he said the following. The right kind of political order could make people truly moral and free. Individual moral freedom could be achieved only by learning to subject one's individual interest to the general will. Individuals did this by entering into a social contract not with their rulers, but with each other. So he said that a social contract was derived from human nature, not from history, traditions, or the Bible. And so we as a people make a social contract with one another, and we bind ourselves with one another through some sort of governmental system. Denis Diderot. Denis Diderot is from 1713 to 1784, and he says the following. All things must be examined, debated, investigated without exception, without regard for anyone's feelings. We will speak against senseless laws until they are reformed, and while we wait, abide by them. So what he did was he created the Encyclopedia. And in the Encyclopedia, you have the complete cycle of knowledge and our understanding of general thinking. It was in 28 volumes. It was alphabetical, cross-reference, and there was illustrations in it. And this is a really big achievement for its time period, because up until this time period, you had a whole bunch of different books that talked about a whole bunch of different things, but there wasn't anything like the encyclopedia where you had all this vast amount of knowledge in one location that was cross-referenced with one another. And think of it as the internet of their time period. And so it was first published in 1751, and it cost 1,500 livres for the set, which was pretty expensive for that time period. Very expensive. But people bought it left and right because it was basically everything we know about everything in one location. And here's kind of an illustration of what the encyclopedia looked at when you're talking about human anatomy. So it had illustrations in it, and it had figures and maps and charts, and like I said, it was the encyclopedia that we use today, but in written form. Nowadays, of course, we use the internet to find all of our information, but back then they obviously didn't have it, so the encyclopedia was the next best thing. And here's just a kind of a map that kind of shows you where subscriptions to the encyclopedia were at. As you can see, most of them were in this area right here, which is predominantly France, and a little bit in Italy, a little bit in the Netherlands, and a little bit in Great Britain. So most of the encyclopedias and subscribers of the encyclopedia were in France, and France is considered the birthplace, or the area in which the Enlightenment took off the most. So, saying that, reading during the Enlightenment skyrocketed. Literacy rate for men was 80%. For women, it was 60%. So during this time period, people learned to read, and it was extremely important because they wanted access to this knowledge, and the only way that they were going to get access to this knowledge was through reading books. Books, however, were expensive. They usually cost one day's wage for the average worker. So, think of the average worker today, how much they make, and, they go down to the Barnes & Noble and they want to buy a book, and it costs them one day's wage. So, in a lot of cases, universities and schools bought these books, very rich people, the upper middle class, but you really didn't find a lot of poor people buying books or having access to them. Many readers for each book. Okay, you got basically a 20-to-1 ratio. What kind of books did they have, or what were they reading during this time period? Novels, plays, literature, journals, memoirs, philosophy, history, theology, newspapers, and political pamphlets were all the rage of the day. And so they're getting their understanding of the world through all these all these types of books and the different types of literature that's out there. And so here you have an illustration showing men gathered together in the library, reading the news of the day or reading an article, and then they'll sit around and discuss it, and debate about it, talk about it, and then inquire about it some more, and then of course they will use the books behind them to facilitate their knowledge. So this is just some of the philosophers that you need for your PowerPoint presentation. There's more in your textbook. The ones that you need are on your Enlightenment worksheet, and you need to find the information that's asked of you on that worksheet to complete the task, and of course and then you're going to use that information for your PowerPoint presentation. But hopefully this helped out a little bit of a better understanding of philosophers and what they were thinking during this time period.